Good day everyone, this is Given Adelas Reyes and in this video I will tackle about the different kinds of obligation. Section 3 Alternative Obligations. Okay, so let's start. So we will discuss about the kinds of obligation according to object, the meaning of alternative obligation and also the right of choice, and lastly the communication of notice that choice has been made. Okay, let's start. So, an obligation where several prestations are due but the performance of one is sufficient, the debtor, or what we call obliger, has the right of election or choice. Election may also be granted to the creditor or what we call obligee. Okay? So, there are kinds of obligation according to object. They are simple obligation, one where there is only one prestation. Um, for example, Mara obliged himself to deliver to Clara a piano. Okay, so second example is Mara promised to repair the car of Clara. Okay, so that is an example of simple obligation. And we have also the compound obligation. So when we say compound obligation, it is one where there are two or more prestations. So it may be conjunctive obligation or distributive obligation. So in conjunctive obligation, this is one where there are several prestations and all of them are due. Okay? So by the way, when we say a prestation, it is a performance of something due upon an obligation. Okay? So, sa distributive obligation naman, it is one where two or more of the prestations is due. So, it may be alternative obligation or facultative obligation. So, sa alternative obligation, it is one where several prestations are due, but the performance of one is sufficient. Or sa facultative obligation naman, it is one where only one prestation is due, but the debtor may substitute another. Okay? So next is alternative obligation. So an alternative obligation is one wherein various prestations are due, but the performance of one of them is sufficient as determined by the choice, which as a general rule belongs to the debtor. Okay, so for example, Mara borrowed from Clara 10,000 pesos. So it was agreed that Mara could comply with his obligation by giving Clara 10,000 or a color television set or by painting the house of Clara. Okay, so here the delivery of the 10,000 or the color television set or the painting of the house of Clara is sufficient to comply with the obligation. So performance must be complete. Clara cannot be compelled to accept, for instance, 5,000 and half of the television, thereby establishing a co-ownership between them, or 5,000 and the painting of a part of his house. Okay? So according to Article 1200, the right of choice belongs to the debtor unless it has been expressly granted to the creditor. So the debtor shall have no right to choose those prestations which are impossible, unlawful, or which could not have been the object of the obligation. Okay, so next. When the right of choice as a rule given to the debtor, as a general rule, the right to choose the prestation belongs to the debtor. Okay, so not it is not belong to the creditor. Okay, so by way of exception, it may be exercised by the creditor, but only when expressly granted to him. So that is according to Article 1205 or by a third person when the right is given to him by common agreement. So that is according to Article 1306. Okay, so for example, is Mara insured his house with Clara, an insurance company. It is agreed that if the house is destroyed or damaged, Clara may either pay the damage or loss or reinstate or rebuild the house. Okay, so since nothing is said in the contract as to who has the right of choice, so it belongs to C. Okay, another one example. Mara binds himself to deliver item 1 or item 2 to Clara on December 10 and to communicate his choice on or before December 5. So if Mara delays in making his choice, Clara cannot exercise the right because it is not expressly granted to him. Okay. So next is the right of choice of debtor when not absolute. So the right of choice of the debtor is subject to limitations. Thus, the debtor cannot choose the prestations which are impossible, unlawful, or which could not have been the object of the obligation. So these prestations are void. Their presence do not invalidate the obligation if it includes other undertakings otherwise free from such defects. Okay. So for example of impossible obligation, okay, so for example of impossible, so Mara promised to deliver Clara 10 sacks of rice or a Bulova wristwatch or soil from Jupiter. So here, Mara cannot choose to deliver soil from Jupiter as it is physically impossible. Okay. So for example, in unlawful, Mara obliged himself to deliver to Clara a kilo of a dangerous drug, or a parcel of land, or a 2-carat diamond ring, or to kill C. So here, Mara can choose only the parcel of land or the 2-carat diamond of ring. Why? Because to deliver a dangerous drug or to kill C is unlawful. For example, and could not have been the object of the application. For example, is Mara borrowed from Clara 30,000. So it was agreed that Mara would give Clara his horse or 30,000 or his German piano. So now Mara has two horses, a racehorse worth 30,000 and a horse for Kalasa that cannot be sold for more than 5,000. So here, Mara cannot choose the horse for Kalesa as it could not have been the object of the obligation. Okay? So next is the only one prestation is practicable. So for example, in this one is Mara will deliver to Clara his horse or his carabao or his refrigerator. So the horse and the carabao were lost without the fault of Mara. So Mara has no more choice. He must deliver the refrigerator, which is the only one practicable. Okay? Okay, so the third right of choice of debtor, not absolute, is the debtor can choose part of the prestation and part of another prestation. So you can see this in Article 1199, Part 2. Okay? So when communication of notice, the choice has been made. So we have the effect of notice. So until the choice is made and communicated, the obligation remains alternative. Once the notice of the election has been given to the creditor, the obligation ceases to be alternative and becomes simple. So such choice, once properly made and communicated, is irrevocable and cannot therefore be changed by other party without the consent of the other. So the concurrence of the creditor to the choice made by the debtor is not required. Okay, so where the choice has been expressly given to the creditor, such choice shall likewise produce legal effects upon being communicated to the debtor. Yes. So next one, we have the proof and form of notice. So the burden of proving that such communication has been made is upon him who made the choice. So the law does not require any particular from regarding the giving of notice. So it may therefore be made orally or in writing, expressly or impliedly. For example, Mara obliged himself to deliver to Clara his car or his racehorse. So Mara chose the car and properly informed Clara of his choice. So the obligation becomes a simple obligation to deliver the car. As such, neither party can change the prestation without the consent of the other. Of course, Mara or Clara may waive his right after a choice has been made. As a general rule, all rights may be waived. Okay? According to Article 1202, the debtor shall lose the right of choice when among the prestations whereby he is alternatively bound. Only one is practicable. So what is the effect when only one prestation is practicable? So if more than one is practicable, it is Article 1200 that will apply. The obligation is still alternative because the debtor has still the right of choice. Okay? So if only one is practicable, the obligation is converted into a simple one. According to Article 1203, if through the creditor's act, the debtor cannot make a choice according to the terms of the obligation, so the latter may rescind the contract with damages. So when the debtor may rescind the contract. So rescission creates the obligation to return the things which were the object of the contract together with their fruits and the price with its interest. Okay? So it is the very nature of an alternative obligation that the debtor can make his choice without the consent of the creditor. Hence, the right given to the debtor to rescind the contract and may recover damages if through the creditor's fault he cannot make a choice according to the terms of the obligation. The debtor, however, is not bound to rescind. So, for example, uh, Mara borrowed from Clara 10,000 pesos. So it was agreed that instead of 10,000, Mara could deliver item 1 or item 2 or item 3. If through the fault of Clara, item 1 is destroyed, so they can rescind the contract if he wants. In case of rescission, the amount of 10,000 must be returned by Mara with interest. Clara, in turn, must pay Mara the value of item 1 plus damages. So Mara, instead of rescinding the contract, may choose item 2 or item 3 with a right to recover the value of item 1 with damages. So if Mara chooses item 1, his obligation is extinguished. Clara is not liable for any damages. Okay? So when the effects of Okay, so when the effects, okay, so according to Article 1204, the creditor shall have right to indemnity for damages when through the fault of the debtor, all the things which are alternatively the object of the obligation have been lost or the compliance of the obligation has become impossible. So the impossible. So the indemnity shall be fixed, taking as a basis the value of the last thing which disappeared or that of the service which last became impossible. Damages other than the value of the last thing or service may also be awarded. Okay, so this is the effects of loss of objects of obligation. Okay, so number one, some of the objects. Okay, if some of the objects of the obligation have been lost or have become impossible even through the fault of the debtor, so the latter is not liable since he has the right of choice and the obligation can still be performed. Okay, so this is an exception to the general rule established in Article 1170 regarding liability for damages arising from negligence. Okay, so second, all of the objects. If all of them have been lost or have become impossible through his fault, the creditor shall have the right to indemnity for damages since the obligation can no longer be complied with. Of course, if the cause of the loss is fortuitous event, the obligation is extinguished. Okay, so the phrase or the compliance of the obligation has become impossible. So refers to obligations to do. So for example, Mara agreed to deliver item 1 or item 2 or item 3. So if the item 1 is lost through the fault of Mara, he can still select either item 2 or item 3. So the loss of item 1 and 2 without or with or without the fault of Mara will reduce the obligation to a simple one. So if all items are lost through his fault, liability will attach. If true, if through a fortuitous event, so the obligations will be extinguished. Okay? Okay, the basic of indemnity. The indemnity shall be fixed, taking as basic the value of the last thing which disappeared, so referring to obligations to give, or that of the service which last became impossible. This is referring to obligations to do. In case of disagreement, it is incumbent upon the creditor to prove such value or which thing last disappeared or which service last became impossible. Okay, so other damages may also be awarded. The next one is when the right of choice belongs to the creditor. Okay, so according to Article 1205, when the choice has been expressly given to the creditor, the obligation shall cease to be alternative from the day when the selection has been communicated to the debtor. So until then, the responsibility of the debtor shall be governed by the following rules. Number one, if one of the things is lost through a fortuitous event, he shall perform the obligation by delivering that which the creditor should choose from among the remainder, or that which remain if only one subsists. He says, second, if the loss of one of the things occurs through the fault of the debtor, the creditor may claim any of those subsisting or the price that which, through the fault of the former, has disappeared with the right to damages. Third one, if all the things are lost through the fault of the debtor, the choice by the creditor shall fall upon the price of any one of them, also with indemnity for damages. Okay? So the same rule shall be applied to obligations to do or not to do in case 1. Some or all of the prestations should become impossible. So in alternative obligations, the right of choice, as a rule, belongs to the debtor. Nevertheless, the debtor may expressly give the right of choice to the creditor. In such a case, the provisions which with respect to the debtor are laid down in the preceding article shall be applicable to the creditor when the right of choice is given to him. So before the creditor makes the selection, the debtor cannot incur and delay. Okay? Now let's tackle the rules in case of loss before creditor has made a choice. So here is the first rule. When a thing is lost through a fortuitous event, for example, Mara obliged himself to deliver to Clara item 1 or item 2 or item 3 or item 4. If item 1 is lost through a fortuitous event, Clara can choose from among the remainder or that which remains if 3 of the items are lost. Okay, so second, when a thing is lost through the debtor's fault. For example, if the loss of the item 1 occurs through the fault of Mara, so Clara may claim item 2 or item 3 or item 4 with the right to damages or the price of item 1 also with the right to damages. Right? So the third is when all the things are lost through the debtor's fault. So for example, if all the items are lost through the fault of Mara, then Clara can demand the payment of the price of any one of them with a right to indemnity for damages. Okay, so when all the things are lost through a fortuitous event, so here the obligation of Mara shall be extinguished if all the items which are alternatively the object of the obligation are lost through a fortuitous event. So in this case, Article 1174 shall apply. Okay, so this is the rules applicable to personal obligations according to Article 1206. When only one prestation has been agreed upon, but the obliger may render another in substitution, the obligation is called facultative. So, okay, the loss of deterioration of the thing intended as a substitute through the negligence of the obliger does not render him liable. But once the substitution has been made, the obliger is liable for the loss of the substitute on account of his delay, negligence, or fraud. So what is a facultative obligation? So it is one where only one prestation has been agreed upon, but the obliger may render another in substitution. Okay, so for example, I will give you my piano, but I may give my LCD television set as a substitute. So in this obligation, only the piano is due. Hence, its loss through my fault will make me liable. Okay, so second example, I will mortgage my land to secure my debt, which shall be payable within 90 days upon my failure to pay my debt within 30 days. So here, I may mortgage my land in substitution of the obligation to make payment within 30 days. Okay? So, what are the effects of loss? So, before substitution, if the principal thing is lost through a fortuitous event, the obligation is extinguished. Otherwise, the debtor is liable for damages. So, the loss of the thing intended as a substitute with or without the fault of the debtor does not render him liable. Okay, so second, after substitution, if the principal thing is lost, the debtor is not liable whatever may the cause of the loss because it is no longer due. So if the substitute is lost, the liability of the debtor depends upon whether or not the loss is due to his fault. Okay, so for example, in before substitution, so for example, Mara will give Clara item 1 or if Mara wants item 2. If item 1 is lost through a fortuitous event, okay, so the obligation of Mara is extinguished. And another one is item 1 is lost through the fault of Mara, so Mara is liable for damages. If item 2 is lost with or without the fault of Mara, so Mara is still liable to deliver item 1, or he is not liable for damage for the loss of item 2 as it is not due. Okay? So in after substitution, based on the preceding example, if item 1 is lost with or without the fault of Mara, Mara is not liable for its loss since his obligation is to deliver item 2. Another one is item 2 is lost through a fortuitous event. Obligation of Mara is extinguished. And last one is item 2 is lost through the fault of Mara. Mara is liable for damages. Okay? So let us distinguish the alternative and facultative obligations. In number of prestations, in the first, several prestations are due but compliance with one is sufficient. While in the second, which is the facultative obligation, only one prestation is due, but although the debtor is allowed to substitute it. So when in okay, so in terms of right of choice, in the first, the right of choice may be given to the creditor or third person, while in facultative, the right to make the substitution is given only to the debtor. Okay, so when the loss through a fortuitous event in alternative, the loss of one or more the alternative through a fortuitous event does not extinguish the obligation, while in facultative, the loss of the thing due extinguishes the obligation. So in loss through fault of debtor, in alternative, the loss of one through the fault of the debtor does not render him liable, while in facultative, the loss of the thing due through his fault makes him liable. Okay, so the last thing is loss through fault of debtor. So in the alternative, where the choice belongs to the creditor, the loss of one alternative through the fault of the debtor gives rise to liability, while in the second, facultative obligations, the loss of the substitute before the substitution through the fault of the debtor does not render him liable. Okay, so that's all, and thank you for listening.